Hello. I have spoken about NPR not being NRC. I had made a video on this when some audio was circulated saying that the government of India has notified national NRC. There was a panic. I wanted people to understand that that notification was not about NRC, it was about NPR. And I had also said that I am not saying that after NPR, NRC will not come, but it was a technical legal answer that what was notified was NPR but not NRC. Now, since there has been a talk of Citizen Amendment Act, an NPR, an NRC, I think it is my bounden duty that I once again address this question. Now, first of all, in the context of CAA, two things have been talked about as the very rational or basis of this new amendment. One is partition of India. Speaker after speaker said that had partition of India not been there, there was no need for such a law. I have two very simple answers to this assertion. One, Congress alone cannot be blamed for the partition. In fact, the idea of the partition was based on the two-nation theory of Savarkar and Jinnah. And there are people who still feel that they can have a theocracy in India. In fact, if you read the statement of object and reasons, the three countries are being criticized for having Islam as the state religion. So I feel that the government and the BJP should make a very clear, explicit statement that having any religion is a state religion is an idea which they reject, and they consider secularism to be the basic structure of the constitution. Moreover, Congress and Nehru alone did not do it. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel was very much a party to it. Now, the other thing about partition, I want to say that Afghanistan was not partitioned from India. Afghanistan was not part of British India, and Afghan became independent country way back, decades before India got independence. Now, the other idea which has been talked about as a reason of this law and the whole controversy is religious persecution. And I concede the point that there have been instances of religious persecution in the three countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. But then, as an academic, I must also say that religious persecution is on rise in many other countries. As many as 61% countries of the world out of 196 are having serious problem of religious persecution. If I just talk of Christians, some 300 million Christians in 21 countries are facing persecution. In fact, if you go by the World Watch list, which largely concentrates on religious persecution of Christians, it mentions North Korea at number 1. These are the countries where extreme religious persecution takes place. And the list is topped by North Korea, followed by Afghanistan. Pakistan is at number 5. And very strangely, India is also at number 10. And Bangladesh is not in top 10 countries according to this list as far as religious persecution is concerned. 2, if we go by the US Commission on Religious Freedom report, India too has been mentioned consistently in last 3 years as tier 2 country on the question of freedom of religion, and it is mentioned as a country of particular concern. I am not saying we are having religious persecution, but we are going in that direction. There is an increase, the report has noted, in violence against Christians and other minorities. Supreme Court itself came down heavily on the incidents of lynching. And I believe that the report has also very clearly said that this violence is perpetuated by extremist Hindu groups. Now, when we are talking of religious persecution, we must also understand that we are not going really to help each and every person of those 6 communities which have been included in CAA, because under religious persecution, you need to have well-founded fear. And this well-founded fear will require an individual inquiry. What were the particular circumstances of that particular individual who is seeking citizenship due to religious persecution? He has to prove that he entered India before 31st December 2014 and he was a citizen of one of these countries. I feel this is a heavier burden. As far as these 3 countries are concerned, how do we decide they are having religious persecution? We need to look at the restrictions on freedom of religion in those countries. I have done a 3-piece series in Indian Express on the constitution and citizenship law of Afghanistan, Pakistan and Bangladesh. And these constitutions are similar to our constitution on freedom of religion and on restrictions on freedom of religion. These constitutions, like us, have a non-discrimination clause and prohibit any discrimination on the basis of religion. In fact, Afghanistan's constitution is ahead because it clearly incorporates UDHR and United Nations Charter, and in Article 29 explicitly forbids persecution. These people have to prove that they were denied to be the member of their religious group, they were not allowed public or private worship, and they have to prove their own circumstances or their friend circumstances, their relative circumstances. And therefore, I would say if you go by textbook definition of religious persecution, maybe the problem of religious persecution in these 3 countries, textually speaking, is not as serious as we have made out. And in Afghanistan, during Taliban's regime, we have really seen serious religious persecution, but Muslims were also persecuted. Liberals were also persecuted. Women who did not adopt veil were also persecuted. Under Article 14, we can make classification. Under classification, we can make a law even against one individual if that individual constitutes a class in himself. Therefore, if the rational object of this law is to help people who have been religiously persecuted, which is the stated object. Of course, term religious persecution is not there in the text of law. It is there in the statement of object and reasons, but not in law. Then there are questions which must be answered. One, how come other persecuted people of these 3 countries have been excluded? If religious persecution is our concern in these 3 countries, we cannot exclude Shias, transgenders, Ahmadiyyas from Pakistan because they are also facing religious persecution. Hazaras, we cannot exclude from Afghanistan. Baloch from Pakistan also. Similarly, Qadianis are facing very serious threat in Bangladesh. Taslima Nasreen, for instance, just for writing a book, has been condemned and facing all kinds of threats in Bangladesh. 2, persons who are similarly circumstanced on the issue of religious persecution in other neighboring countries, why we excluded them? So Tamilians in Sri Lanka, Christians in Bhutan, Rohingyas in Myanmar, Muslims in China. And third, if you go by the Supreme Court judgment about Assam, IMDT Act was struck down because the court said you cannot have a law on the basis of territory. There was one burden of proof for Assam under IMDT and another rule of burden of proof under the Foreigners Act for the rest of India. If we believe in religious persecution, and that is the rational object to achieve of this law, how come if a person entered in X territory, he will be eligible for the benefit to get Indian citizenship, but if he entered Y territory, he will not get that benefit? This negates the very logic of this law. If I am persecuted, what is my entry point into India and where I am residing should be irrelevant. Persecution should be the central concern. I would also say that in a parliamentary democracy, we must trust our Prime Minister. He speaks for the whole nation. I understand that many a times politicians do talk in contradictory tones, but the final word should be with the Prime Minister. Prime Minister has said, sensing the public outcry against CAA, that his government is not intending to come up with NRC. There hasn't been any discussion on NRC. Whatever be the presidential address or different statements by the ministers in parliament, let us still give a benefit of doubt and trust the Prime Minister. I also would say that after PM has spoken, even Home Minister has diluted and has brought a difference between NPR and NRC. And I think that Home Minister is right. NPR is not NRC or National Register of Indian Citizens. NPR and National Register of Indian Citizens are indeed different, but very closely connected to each other. If we make a list, how many oranges we are having, how many apples we are having, how many bananas we are having, how many mangoes we are having, one consolidated list. Now to get the list of oranges is a click away. Once this current NPR, which will be on from April 1, 2020 is made, getting into National Register of Indian Citizens will be a click away. It will be entire digitized data. Of course, NPR will also include non-citizens, but we can exclude them. And that is the problem. And that is why the criticism of even NPR. Let us look at it legally. NPR, if it is part of census, should be under the Census Act. Neither under the Census Act of 1948 nor under 1990 census rules you find a reference to NPR. NPR and census are considered two different entities and distinct activities even by the government of India. And that is why separate allocation of money. So for NPR, Cabinet has approved 3,941.35 crore and for census 8,754.23 crore. The 2020 NPR is asking questions which are relevant to determine citizenship when it is talking about your parents' date of birth and their place of birth. As many as 8 new questions are there. I think Government of India should quickly drop those 8 questions so that immediately there is a sense of calm and contentment in the country. Now these NPR, if it is not done under Census Act, under what law it is done? It is done under section 14A of Citizenship Act. It was inserted in this act and in 2003 for issuance of national identity card. And it says that the central government may compulsorily register every citizen of India and issue national identity card. Then under this 2003 rules very clearly provide in section 3 that the Registrar General of Citizen Registration shall establish and maintain National Register of Indian Citizens. Then they say what the National Register of Citizens will contain. In the same section, same rule, Rule 3, we find sub-rule 4, central government may by an order issued in this regard decide a date by which the population register shall be prepared by collecting information relating to all persons who are usually residing within the jurisdiction of local registrar. Therefore, NPR is a sub-rule of the same rule which is talking of National Register of Indian Citizens. In 2003, the Citizenship Registrations of Citizens and Issue of National Identity Card Rules 2003. Then in Rule 4, which talks of preparation of National Register of Indian Citizens, again a reference to NPR comes in when it says for the purposes of preparation and inclusion in the local register of Indian citizens, the particulars collected of every family and individual in population register shall be verified and scrutinized. The exclusion will start at this stage, and that is problematic. Moreover, National Population Register or NPR is nowhere mentioned in the text of Citizenship Act, and whatever is not in the text of the Act, rules cannot really provide for that. Rules are after all subordinate legislation. Act is a parent legislation. Subordinate legislation or rules cannot go against the parent act. And therefore, I feel that this mention of National Population Register should ideally be deleted from 2003 rules. Therefore, to conclude, I can say NPR and NRIC are distinct but very closely related to each other. You cannot prepare National Register of Indian Citizens without National Population Register. Thank you very much.